Hello and welcome to Tech Talk. It's the 2026 Canadian Grand Prix. Now, previously on Tech Talk, there were a huge number of upgrades fitted to all of the cars up and down the pit lane, and it got to the point where there were almost too many to include in the show. And the people behind the camera right now don't know what I'm about to say, but they switched the light off on me to stop me talking. There's loads of really interesting stuff on the car to take a look. Hang on. Guys, I haven't finished yet. There's still quite a lot of cars to get through. I can't do that anymore. I've taken the fuse out of the switch and they didn't realise that. So here we go. A huge amount of upgrades from the Canadian Grand Prix. The second largest amount of upgrades we've seen this season. I think there's an awful lot more to come. So coming up, we're going to have a look at some clever exhaust solutions. Yep, more of those to come. Some cunning brake cooling tricks. And some really fascinating little bits and bobs around the diffusers on a number of cars. But where shall we start? Well, let's start at the front of the championship and the front of the field, it seems, and that means starting with the front of the Mercedes. And yes, Mercedes have changed the front of their car. This is the new front wing end plate on the Mercedes, and it's fitted to both cars this weekend. Now, the first bit I'm going to draw your attention to is, well, here is the part that sticks out from the front wing end plate and the new bit on it that sticks up from the front wing above the other bit that sticks up. I'll leave you to say what you think that should be called. But these new aerodynamic elements around this front section of the front wing end plate is a little indication on the level of advancement that Mercedes, who, don't forget, have got a pretty decent amount of wind tunnel allocation this season, have been putting into this already very competitive car. And the front wing changes are not just limited to that part of the car. And this new end plate isn't just the end plate that's different. Have a look here. The front wing elements have actually been reworked around the end plate as well. Where they link to it is actually much lower down than where it had been previously. So if you look at an older version of the Mercedes front wing, it met the front wing end plate about here, a little way up from the leading edge. But if you look at the leading edge now, it sits completely in line with the leading edge of that front wing end plate. And when you change something at the front of the car, everything downstream of it will have to be changed too. So this is why you're almost seeing this change to this extra element above the front wing. And look here, you can see that vertical element. You can see the shape of it very clearly trying to generate a little bit of outwash around that front tyre. Huge amounts to see on this car, and let's keep looking at it because there is a huge amount to see. Moving back along the bodywork to behind that front wheel, we've gone into the garage here, which is not normally allowed, but we did it anyway. You can see a little change to the leading edge of the floor, a bit in line with sort of what Ferrari have been doing since the beginning of the season. See this extra element they've added in this leading edge of the floor with that little bridge section, just like Ferrari have done, except the Ferrari runs, they have these link sections all the way across the floor. Mercedes opting just for one on that outer element. Lovely little bit of design there. Let's see how that progresses. Then we keep moving backwards through the car, or actually a little bit further forwards here. Brake ducting, super important in Canada. And let's not forget, Mercedes doesn't have those conventional air scoops on the front brake cooling package. So they've had to enlarge this section between, this is the cake tin section of the front brake cooling package, this is your inner plate of the wheel, and there's the actual brake ducts sandwiched between them, which is something a few teams have done this season. And also what goes in must come out. There's the outlet on the front brakes as well. And Mercedes really have been giving it the beans on the aerodynamics as well. So this is the floor that Mercedes was running up until now, the most recent version. You can see some of the key shapes. This longitudinal slot here, then some openings along here. Now this concept remains pretty similar to what they're running in the Canadian Grand Prix. However, they've just massively upped the complexity. Want to see what I'm talking about? Here you go, other side of the car of course, and now just compare the two. You can see the same general design concepts, can't you? But it's just so much more complex. An additional sort of end plate section running along the trailing edge here, and then blending back into these sections. Then look at all of these additional link sections all the way up and along this whole section on this ramp ahead of the rear wheel. The rear wheel isn't fitted in this picture again, but what I think is going on here is very similar to going back to those pre-2020 generation of cars where there was a huge amount of focus on the airflow just up there into the gap between the spinning rear wheel and the edge of the diffuser, and the teams are discovering that area of exploitation again, as they almost, it's not, sealing the side of the diffuser is kind of the wrong way of describing it, but there's a nasty vortex or two that comes off, a spinny roundy bit of air that comes off the base of the rotating rear tyre. If that spinny roundy bit of air gets into your diffuser volumes, where there's some other very carefully curated spinny bits of air that generate lovely downforce, it really confuses the back end of the car. You lose a chunk of downforce, and this is what this is all to do with, to try to stop those bits of airflow, which is sometimes called tyre squirt, coming off the base of those tyres going into the diffuser. And so this is all about maximising the rear downforce of the car. And well, if you look at the complexity of that, it's almost organic, isn't it? It looks like something from science fiction that's come to invade Earth. Well, Mercedes are invading the front of the field, aren't they? Because look at that, it is so intricate. And there was a regulation in the past that said the floors must be single and continuous and you weren't allowed holes in them. Well, that's pretty holy. The otherworldly nature of the rear end of the Mercedes is also worth looking at as you come to the rear of the floor. Now, I only noticed this when I was trying to look at something else on the Mercedes, so I'm not sure if it's been like this since the start of the season. If it has, I'm sorry I didn't spot it earlier, but this is fascinating. Look at this section of the rear floor just on top of the diffuser. We've got what look like three little, well, almost like eggs, little blisters on the trailing edge of the top of the diffuser. Now, two of them have got little link sections coming down to them from a different angle, from a different part of the car. I'm not quite sure whether there's a sensor housing in there or something, or whether this is designed to prevent the floor from flexing too much. Well, let's get a closer look at them here, and you can see that trailing edge of the diffuser, very aggressive shape, very reminiscent of some sort of military aircraft that you might see flying around the deserts of Nevada at night. Well, not hopefully, if they're doing their security right. But this does look like some sort of stealth aircraft, doesn't it? But the airflow around these parts of the car, super important. And I guess this possibly has a similar effect to those jagged little windscreens at the leading edge of the cockpit, but I'm not entirely sure. This will be a really interesting area to see if other teams are exploiting it, but lovely little detail, not entirely sure of its purpose. And just again, look at these little metal stays that run into these blisters. Really like to get underneath the back of that Mercedes and see what's underneath these blisters. Pretty sure they won't let me. But when this upgrade came out and they put it in the pit lane for the first time in Canada, the first team to take a look at the back end of the Mercedes was a team that's got a similar back end. It's the McLaren. Now, McLaren do their own gearbox, but they also have the Mercedes power unit underneath that bodywork. This is the Mercedes as it was previously. Pretty good single continuous bodywork there. They did have some optional cooling louvres as they went along. Well, that design has been revised coming into this weekend, and McLaren has introduced a couple of little openings just there ahead of the computer manufacturer logo. This is actually a very similar approach to what Ferrari has been doing for some time. Actually, even before the start of this generation of car, Ferrari have been having that technique. Just a slightly closer look here. And these opening slits on the bodywork, you can see them quite nicely in this shot here, just open up, and this is something you'll see up and down the pit lane. This shape has become quite popular for cooling the rear end of this generation of Formula One car, and McLaren clearly following that. But also they've changed the cooling on the spine of the car ever so slightly. Previous races they've had an opening on the central section of the spine blanked off for this race, and I think that's just because it was quite cool on the opening day in Canada. But there you get a lovely shot of those two cooling slots, and you can see the additional blanked off section for the cooling louvres on the top of the bodywork. But that's not the only change on the McLaren. There's an awful lot more to see as I roll through here. One of the obvious changes, particularly if you're Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri, is this additional aerodynamic element on top of the halo. This isn't something that we haven't seen before. It's something we've seen periodically since the halos were introduced. But I saw a lovely picture of Lando Norris checking out the car coming into this weekend when he had a first look at this halo. It's a double element design, and well, they're just playing around with the airflow around the cockpit, a sensitive area of the car. Around the front wing though, an even more sensitive area of the car, the front wing end plates have been really quite significantly revised. They look to be the same shape, but when you look a bit more in detail, when you look at the foot plate, that's the base of the end plate here, this bit that sticks out, it's got a much more aggressive, much larger ramp up to this leading section, bringing the air in underneath that leading edge. So McLaren clearly discovering a bit more of a gain in the tunnel there. their brand new wind tunnel, of course. And then the trailing edge of the floor, again, this area that so many teams are developing really complex, really intricate solutions on. It's really beautiful engineering. The ancient Greeks actually didn't differentiate between art and engineering, and I think they probably got it right when you look at this. And you look at the lovely sets of swoops and sweeps and the back of the floor here. Again, it's all about what we saw on the Mercedes. This section here, just trying to get that airflow through. And you can see that little channel in the ducts there. Absolutely lovely. And all of this section, this plate that they've introduced on the leading edge of the floor and that little ramp up around the tyre. Very, very nice pieces of design there from McLaren. Not as intricate, though, as that from Mercedes. And you probably wouldn't expect McLaren to be as intricate as Mercedes because they simply don't have as much wind tunnel and CFD time as Mercedes do. However, it's the month of May right now. In June and July, that wind tunnel and CFD allocation gets reset. Mercedes is going to fall down to the bottom of the table and McLaren is going to move up ever so slightly. Having a look at the trailing edge of the bodywork of the McLaren, again, this is just one of those nice little details. You've got this, a few people commented that they ran out of pixels when designing the top of their engine cover fin, very like Ferrari. There's just these lovely little step on the trailing edge of it as well, which you don't normally get to see, but just a nice bit of angle from our camera operators there. Then finally, I just want to talk about the rear wing and the rear wing end plates, another area where the McLaren team have developed the car quite significantly. And it's subtle, but it's there, it's visible. These sculptings on the inner edge, and they're also on the outer edge of the rear wing end plate. And I think these little details, it looks so minor, doesn't it? It doesn't look like anything at all, but actually it all makes a big, big difference. Even the little difference between the top edge of the rear wing end plate and the upper edge of the wing element with that big old gurney on the top of it there, all of that makes a difference, and that's what this is all about. And then finally, I just thought it'd be nice to take a look around the rear of the car because we've seen this before. This isn't actually anything new. This is the exhaust plate, the bracket that holds the exhaust together, which definitely doesn't have an aerodynamic effect, does it, with its wing shape and end plates, which are incredibly clear in this picture here. I mean, that's just a wing, isn't it? I mean, that is your classic race car wing section, rear wing here. It does look like it's just been taken off a model car, bolted on. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because these wing designs underneath the exhaust and around the exhaust tailpipe are getting more and more advanced. And you start to think, well, if it's a wing design, how many elements will it have? Because wings have different elements. Well, Audi have raised the bar on this one. How many elements would you say the Audi exhaust support bracket has here? 1, 2, 3, 4 element, a quad element bracket on the trailing edge of the Audi tailpipe. And Audi have been busy with their car, revising the whole rear end, changing their cooling louvre layout, and it's almost down in the channel ahead of the rear suspension there, cooling there. That Audi is still an absolutely fascinating car to me, and I would probably think that at some point this season we're just going to do a whole episode dedicated to that car, just because I find it fascinating. I hope you do too. If not, we're going to probably do it anyway. The rear floor of the Audi as well, revised slightly at the trailing edge, not nearly as complex as some of the other teams. Very different approach that Audi are taking though. They're taking the approach of having these big sections on the trailing edge, and with a double-decker section at the rear with that little fill-in at the back, almost a metal fill-in. So curious to see why they've gone that route with it, putting a little bit of metal in there. A team that is also taking a curious approach here, and I am rushing through this because I'm getting angry looks from behind the camera already, is Ferrari. Now, Ferrari had this on the car last time out in Miami, but it was pretty hard to pick up on the camera. Got the camera operators to come in and get us a different shot. And what I'm talking about here is this section of the front suspension. Now, you can see a plate on the front of the car here in the monocoque. Now, this plate is interchangeable. This follows the example set by Mercedes from a few years ago, where they had a front suspension element where they could change the angle of the front wishbone up or down, and Ferrari have done the same on this year's car, and that's something we haven't seen on any other car, including the Mercedes. Now, going into Miami, Ferrari's suspension was sort of about here. That was the sort of angle. It looks similar, doesn't it? But I'll redraw the arrow on what it is now, and the front suspension sits a bit further forwards and a bit lower down in that panel. Now, I wonder if this is something we're going to see Ferrari changing through the season. Are they going to change it track to track? How many other variants have they got? Or is it just a single variant they've changed? When Mercedes had its version, it changed it just the once and then never went back to the previous layout. Ferrari have changed it once. Let's see. We're worth keeping an eye on, and we will be sticking the camera in at this exact angle at future races. So we will get to see it. Here's just a slightly clearer version. You can see that panel they've inserted there into the front. It's also quite interesting to see the little bulge, almost that little keel that comes down here to pick up the lower elements of the suspension, and also just how close they all sit together. It's amazing. From Ferrari to Red Bull, and actually this was an upgrade in Miami, but it's just something we didn't have a good shot of again, and I just wanted to bring everybody's attention to this element in the front bodywork, linking the floor to the base of the chassis, was introduced in Miami, and it's an area of the car that a lot of teams are playing around with. Red Bull actually introduced a slightly different variant of that in Canada, but you can also see very nicely in this image the leading edge of the floor. This is the plank that always gets talked about. You wear this bit too excessively, this is where the penalties come in. So if that bashes into the floor too much, that's where you're picking up the penalty. And here, the car isn't up on jacks, it's sitting on its tyres in the pit lane. This is how close the cars run to the ground when they're sitting without a downforce load on them. So you can see how little movement and little scope for movement there is between the fronts of the floor and the road. So too much downforce, too much load, balance the car wrong, that's going to get worn away pretty quickly, and that's why that always comes up on some of the bumpier circuits around the calendar. I just thought that was a lovely image to share with all of you. Moving on, Williams. Williams have again revised the trailing edge of their floor. There's a look at that, another nice angle here just to show you some of the details and how it pinches in just at the back. I thought that's a nice little detail there. But what I really wanted to draw your attention to is the exhaust tailpipe of the Williams, and you can see they've got a little winglet bracket in the exhaust plume. Aha, some of those who watch Tech Talk on a regular basis go, no Sam, you've got this wrong. They ran that last time out. You're right, they did. This is Miami. This is Canada. Yeah, they've changed it again. They've got almost like a much wider section in from a different angle. You can see it very clearly. It's like they've taken the original one and changed the aspect ratio of it, made it a bit wider, and now they're following that trend of having this wide plate in the trailing edge of the exhaust plume. And some people are calling it the flick tail mode, which is a strange description, but F1 engineers sometimes speak a completely different language. Now, staying on the topic of exhaust designs, guess the team. Well, there are only a couple of teams in the pit lane that hadn't gone down the route. This is Racing Bull's rather basic version of a flick tail mode, if we have to call it that. And you can see they've just got a little tab in there that looks like they haven't removed it after fitting it when they put together the Papercraft kit. But nonetheless, that is Racing Bull's exhaust variant. But Racing Bull's is not a car to ignore. This is the trailing edge of the Racing Bull's bodywork. And what I wanted to show you and draw your attention to is this little flick up on the trailing edge here. It's very simple. It's a little tab at the back of above the diffuser. Nice design. You can get another nice view of that little tab in the exhaust pipe. Racing Bull's interesting idea. So let's go and look at Haas, who've taken the same idea and tripled it. 3 of these tabs above the trailing edge of the diffuser. Now, you can take a guess at what this is supposed to do. Maybe generating a little bit of a stall on the rear floor to generate a little bit of a low pressure area to bring out air from underneath the diffuser. Now, I'm just guessing there. Don't have the CFD, don't have the wind tunnel to try it. Maybe somebody online will try to have a model of this and have a go at it, but clearly an area of car development that is being exploited by some teams and hasn't really been fully explored yet. Here you can see these aren't little sensor housings. This is a deliberate change to the trailing edge of the floor, and a nice little area for Haas to explore. And Haas does have a decent chunk of wind tunnel development time and a big budget from Toyota. Keep an eye on that one. And one of the things that they had actually in testing, we've seen this before, an asymmetric cooling layout with 4 louvres on one side and 2 on the other. But you can see they've got a lot more scope for increasing the cooling around the track. So I think you're going to see hotter circuits, and we missed a couple of hot circuits. You're going to see some more extreme cooling variants on the Haas. But the Haas development this weekend has been really quite interesting, and I want to get a better look at this. And again, this is one I think we're going to come back to. But keep an eye on this element of the Haas, these vertical sections at the front of the possibly barge board sections, leading edge of the floor, big floor plates. I don't know what to call them. They're not really barge boards in the traditional sense, but you've got these additional horizontal sections on the inner edge of that, and that's exploring an area that has been explored by some other teams already, but this is quite a different solution. So I think we're going to have to come back to that in a future weekend. Then moving towards the back of the grid, and the back of the car at the back of the grid, it's the Cadillac. There is the Cadillac's exhaust plate that we missed last time out in Miami because they switched the lights off and now they can't do that anymore. Here you can see Cadillac's fairly basic solution, but they're going down the same route as everybody else. But we really shouldn't ignore Cadillac because there's some lovely detailing on this car. And as the car develops, we will be taking more of a look at that as well. And one of those lovely bits of detail here you can see on the front of the floor. It's got just these little bulges and housings on the leading edge of the floor. That's the front of the floor where you've got those bits that come down in it, sort of going that way. But have a look here. There's this little turning element here, little sculpting in there, probably following the lead of Aston Martin. But again, trying to generate maybe a little bit of outwash out this way. Just a nice little bit of design. The Cadillac, in my mind, is a lovely, nice piece of Formula One design. But, well, all of them are, aren't they? And that's sort of the point. And with Monaco coming up and Barcelona, well, I'm not going to give them the fuse back, am I? Thanks for watching.